This program sells video art. Do you want to buy video art, or is there really nothing there? Are we aware of what's behind our images? Is there somebody here that knows what seeing does? Are you really conscious that something could be askew? That maybe all the images that you've seen before, whether it's all the women that have been chased and raped or murdered, that you've seen in hundreds of films, that they are there, somehow filtering your viewing. You see that this image reveals and conceals. This image is also a presentation, a kind of model. A video artist is trying to clear the curtain, move that surface away so we can see again.
When we talk about video, I'm talking about independent video. And when I say independent, I'm saying it's independent of mainstream commercial forms of television. The dominant, capitalized form of mass entertainment that describes the history of the institution of broadcast television in the United States. It's supported by the telecommunications laws, by monopolies that created this institution of television. And it's against that artists have worked to create the model of television being something that can be empowered by individual forms of expression.
One of the interesting things about video was that it could be like TV, but like a cartoon of TV. So that on the one hand you had the art world, and on the other hand you had the television industry, and you could position yourself somewhere along that spectrum while referring to both. You just took the Portapak and you recorded, and the Portapak was a cast-off from the industry, and you felt that you really could look a different way than the industry was looking.
At that time, there were 3 networks in America, and they replicated each other, basically. And there was a very heady sense, and I think this comes out of the counterculture and the idea that there really was a counterculture, that why couldn't there be an alternative television as well? All you needed was this black and white camera.
I think 68 or so was some of the first artists' work in some of the public TV stations, and I remember seeing some early things on the public television in New York, where I grew up. Gene Youngblood had just published the book Expanded Cinema, which talked about a sort of a kind of a techno-utopian philosophy. He also discussed very specifically some of the technical parameters, or so-called aesthetic parameters of the medium. And the other thing was, I think around that time, Frank Zappa came out with a film, 200 Motels, which I saw, which was done entirely on video, and I was very impressed with it.
Nobody studied video in 1972, except people who were working in television. I mean, there wasn't any video to study. You just picked it up. You borrowed a camera from somebody and sort of learned. I learned as I went along, like everybody else of my generation.
Everybody that happened to be using a video camera was called a video artist in the late 60s, early 70s. And they were like documentary, maybe Marxist university journalists. And then there was the dance people who did these insipid dance videos. And then there was a performance group, and then there was the body artists that showed themselves in the corner of the room for like 9 hours.
In the beginning of the video, I think it was used by independents coming from the art experience, or for political groups coming from the counter-information.
Artist video was established gallery artists using video either to document their conceptual or performance pieces, or to create conceptual or performance pieces for video. People like William Wegman, for example. They found a way to distribute, to disseminate these conceptual and performance pieces through video. Then you had video art, which was more like the people like Vasulka, who were asking the question, what is the art of this new medium? What is this new clay? What is this new substance called, the electron, and the signal? From a formal and graphic point of view, what can you do with this?
Every point in the history of video art is not isolated from the complex of social change that was part of. Documentary video, image processing video was seen in that period, the early 70s, against the Vietnam War, against the issues of civil rights, against the issues of an empowerment of television. The hope that a technology McLuhan Way would embody a change itself, and that there was actually a hope that American society could and would change.
The Vietnam War, I think, was a lesson that the best technology didn't ensure victory in any given struggle. And that certainly made me question a set of values that, I'm speaking of more or less collective societal values of embracing technology without questioning it.
Video, for better or worse, does have a kind of history. I mean, if you want to call it a history, it does have a certain set of precedents. There are people who've worked in the field for numbers of years, who've developed means of doing things. And in a sense, that's the context in which the work exists in, and how to deal with that context. Is it time to abandon the notions that had sort of fed it before and to rethink video, say, not as video per se, but as maybe a kind of medium, a kind of information system, not particularly differentiated from other sorts of information systems. Maybe it's computers, maybe it's newspapers.
Electronic media is taking us into a territory that we didn't fully understand, that it's a process of going into it and understanding what the issues are, issues of representation, the issues that can be raised that are relevant to the kind of cultural situation we're in, which can make that work more accessible. How are we going to transmit it? How is it going to be distributed? Who's going to see it? Who's the audience for it? All those questions are definitely coming into view, and I think that the artists are responding to that.
In the early days, our tools were so primitive by comparison to the industry's tools that just by looking at it, you turned on, an image and you could instantly see that it was an artwork, not a television work, because of that kind of gap. But you can't tell that anymore. The only way you can really tell is by looking at it and by looking at the way that one approaches the media.
My first camera, you couldn't go 10 feet back without being out of focus. Reel 1 is all close-up work. There's no fancy microphone, so they're just like simple statements and directives. Reel 2 and 3 is a better camera, so I'm moving back 10 feet. I've got a new microphone, so I'm talking in whole stories. Reel 5 is moved to New York, the new equipment, more complicated editing possibilities. So some of the stories have breaks in them. Doesn't mean they're getting better. In fact, I think Reel 1 is still, all in all, the best, and it's with the worst, in quote, equipment.
The most successful work with video was not to be led by the technology, but to challenge the technology. There's a whole history of artists remaking the very tools of video, remaking the camera, remaking the image processing, remaking the image, remaking the television set, to break it away from the commercial uses and see it as an individual, independent form of expression.
What I always felt about video was that it was a great synthesizer. It would let me take words, it would let me take performers, it would let me take music, it would let me take the processing of the image, the giving of an image a certain kind of texture or quality. It would let me do all of these things in whatever order or shape or form I wanted.
When the video came, I just grabbed it. This was the medium of total freedom and unwritten territory. And so I just was free of all that education and all that European competition. I remember the films in the 60s were magnificent. It was just after the neorealism, there's a French New Wave, and it was just fantastic. It still was like an intellectual challenge. It was called art. And Bergman was practicing, and Fellini, all those guys were doing magnificently. I never felt I could possibly compete with those giants. So I was just very relieved to move to video when there was nobody, or there was just a handful of competitors.
When I started working with video, I was remembering all the international cinema that I had grown up with, from the Brazilian cinema, the Japanese, the African cinema. I realized that I could make a statement, and even if it wasn't a national cinema or a national video that I would produce, there would be an expression that would be different, that would offer an alternative to the mainstream.